Hey, so a friend of mine dropped this off, and this is a very valuable guitar. This is a real 1959 Les Paul Standard. This actually used to belong to Joe Walsh. This guitar might come up for sale. That's what we hear. So this is probably the most sought after, the most idolized guitar in all of guitardom. You'll read in Wall Street Journal and people talk about a 59 Les Paul. They don't even know what it is. They just know that a 59 Les Paul is a big deal. Any 50s Les Pauls are big deals. Guitars like this are from an era gone by. And people have always chased them for tone, and they'll chase them even in the late 60s. They chased them for tone. They'll chase them for tone 100 years from now. And they'll always go up in value. If you've ever seen the movie The Red Violin, about a Stradivarius violin as it changes hands and each time goes up higher and higher and higher. These are crazy expensive, and it's from an era when they had good woods, they had people hand making stuff, they used they would hand apply lacquers. It's just this part of history. And the reason I bring this up, this very expensive guitar, is really just to entertain you with geekdom. This isn't about selling guitars, but I've highlighted this before too, and someone called me and asked me, like, what's the big deal? This is, as I've said before, they stopped making Les Pauls in the 60s. They just stopped selling, and Fender Stratocaster and Jaguar and Jazzmaster, they were more of a double cutaway design, so Gibson went to the SG. They came back in 1968. There's a lot involved in 1968 that they reissued the Les Paul. You got to remember that Rock Around the Clock was the first rock and roll record in 1954. In 1955, Elvis hit with Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog. Those were massive hits, and it changed music forever. Gibson in 1950 made 5,000 guitars a year. In 1965, they made 100,000 guitars a year, and all of that was largely due to Elvis. So now we're in 1968, and we've got, for the first time in American history, guitar gods. There's Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, and so many others in and around that. They all borrowed from American blues music. And a lot of guys like Clapton was playing a Les Paul. When Clapton was playing a Les Paul, they didn't make Les Pauls. So as a kid, you'd go and you'd look in your catalog, you'd be like, I want one like Clapton has. You couldn't find it. In the 70s, when I was in high school, I tried to find a guitar like Eric Clapton had. You couldn't find them. They didn't make them. So in 1968, Gibson sold to a brewery, so a South American beer maker. They made beverages, including they imported teas and woods. So they seemed like a logical place. The South American Brewing Company bought Chicago Music. Chicago Musical Instruments owned Gibson from 1944 until 1969. And then this company came in from South America and bought it, and they were fronted by two Harvard business graduates that started Norlin. And Norlin is another era. Before that came this 1968 Les Paul Custom and the 1968 Gold Top. There's things about that that's very interesting that you can compare. One of them is this logo. The logo at the top, especially if you look at compared to this. Here, come in the camera and you can see this logo, and I will point out this has an open O and an open B at the top, and it's done in pearl. This was done with a pearl trim like that, where this logo from later, from the 70s, was more done in a square. They made the logos on the side, they put a little square in, but they don't have the open O, they don't have the open B. And you might say, so what? They make them with the open and O and open B. It's not necessarily about that, it's about the era. 1968 is only 13 years after Elvis's first hit record. Rock was really young. We look back at it now, but things were just blooming. This was the early stages of rock and roll. Another thing about this is they say that these were made out of 50s parts. It makes sense that they had bodies laying around in case anything happened to them for warranty work, But as Norlin came onto the scene, they're going, what are we doing with all that? Let's reissue. There's only 433 Les Paul Customs that have this feature. Another thing is on the back of the neck, and you can see this 70s guitar, if you come in close, is a three-piece neck. It's a 1-2 3-piece neck. And they did that for stability, but they also did that because they were using up good wood supplies. So this guitar is a one-piece Honduran mahogany neck, and it is probably done in the 50s. It is probably 50s parts. That's what makes these such a unique investment. When old Les Pauls are going for as much as a house in downtown Minneapolis, then you're looking at guitars here in 68 seem very undervalued. Another thing is the long Tenant, and Gibson has gone back and forth. It's kind of a bitch to make a long Tenant. That is, this part of the neck goes underneath the pickup cover, underneath this pickup. It has more gluing surface, it has more resonance, it couples the body and the neck better, and it is a detail that was a detail from the 50s guitars that they carried over for the 68s. Norlin started really in the next year, July next year, and they immediately went to cutting costs, going through woods, being less fussy about woods, and dealing with the fact that they had a lot of back orders. I have owned and got 68 Les Paul Customs that have PAFs in them too. So this era signifies kind of the last of the old classics. And this particular guitar comes with its original hang tag. And again, just for you geeks, and this is totally just a geek thing, you got to look at this Les Paul Standard from '59. This is a real '59. This guitar was owned by Joe Walsh. It's pretty well documented, and it has all these features that this guitar has. It has a one-piece neck. It has no volute. It has no Made in USA stamp. It has the open B and the open O. It has this long Tenant in there. It has all these features that were carefully done by guys that handmade guitars back in the 50s. And these are perhaps one of the most coveted, these are the most coveted electric guitar in the world. There is probably 1,400 of these 59 era bursts. There is 433 of these. So I just want to touch base on that, because the other thing too is the sandwiched body. If you look at a lot of these 70s and even a 69 Les Paul, they're using wood differently, so they use less wood. This is all one sheet Honduran mahogany. And it's not sandwiched to save money. It's not three-piece neck to save money. This was made out of old 50s parts. So for us, guys that love to geek, this is such a cool, geeky thing. And when it's gone, it'll be years before we see another one. So I did want to share that with y'all, mostly because my friend had brought in this burst, and I wanted to show that to you. That's a guitar that might come up for sale, but again, yeah, it's one of those things, if you got to ask how much, you know, it's the cost of a house in a nice part of town. But this is still priced like a reissue for the most part, priced like one of the limited edition that Gibson's put out. So there you go. We got a nice, light 1968 Les Paul Custom that is really more about historical significance. Remember, when this was made, Elvis's first hit, Hound Dog, was only 13 years old, and there was just the first records in '68 of Hendrix, the first records of Led Zeppelin. The Beatles were making some of their most important work while they were breaking up. It's a really cool piece of American history. So on that note, not to cut anything from the 70s Les Pauls that I borrowed from John, but these 68s are rare, and for the most part, they are 50s, as close to 50s guitars as you can get. If you can afford a real 50s Les Paul, buy one. You'll never let you down. Okay, that's all I got for now. I'm going to read through my manual here and see how to adjust my guitar. Toggle switch.